morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today to show support to the great assemblage of speakers we've gathered. We have people here from various countries, including Hungary, Ireland, Canada, Austria, Chile, the U.S., Bulgaria. Am I leaving anything out? I think that's got it. And we have a wonderful program set up for you today. My name is Melissa O'Sullivan. I'm Deputy Director here at the Danube Institute. And this is a program, the Free Market Roadshow, that we've been doing as partners here in Budapest with the Austrian Economic Center out of Vienna. And this is our 9th year to be in partnership with Barbara Kohlm, Dr. Barbara Kohlm, who's the founder of the Austrian Economic Center as well as the Hayek Institute. And we're so delighted to be their partner in this great effort of spreading the message of free market economies, the Hayekian side of the economic argument. And I became baptized in the beneficial aspects of this when I was a government contractor working with a NASA facility. And I became aware through my years of working on this contract and then a subsequent contract with another federal entity that in a government system, the goal or the mission that the agency is set up to be in charge of is forgotten, and the process becomes the goal. So I don't know if it's just the nature of government, but government is process-oriented. So my lesson I learned from this experience was that if you want to have the most laborious and expensive way and the least inefficient way to accomplish any task, then put the government in charge of it. But since I thought that would not be a good policy, I became convinced that the best way for us to solve our societal issues is by restricting the sphere of what government is trying to accomplish. So this is where all of the people who are speaking today are coming from. They're coming from a place of the free market is a better way to solve the problems that we have operating under a government regulatory system. Okay, so now we're going to get started. Enough about this. I'm going to call up Philip Pilkington, who will be our moderator for the first panel, and he'll be introducing the first panel. Thank you so much.
Hello, everybody. Jonapot. Thanks for coming. So the first panel, we'll be talking about central bank digital currencies, a bit of a hot topic right now. Be very interested to hear the speakers' thoughts on this. And we have two great speakers for it. We have Dr. Adam Banai, who's the executive director of the Hungarian State Bank. So obviously that'll be a very interesting perspective on central bank digital currencies. And also Dr. Barbara Kohlm, who's the Austrian Economic Center founder and director. So if the speakers would like to come up, I think Dr. Barbara Kohlm is first. So thank you.
First of all, good afternoon, and thank you again to Melissa and to John O'Sullivan and to the Danube Institute for hosting us here. And as you know, it's the 9th time that we have the privilege to discuss with you what is dear to us, namely individual and economic freedom. And when we discuss the coming digital euro, a double-edged sword, I give you my perspective as a former central banker right away. I am totally opposing the CBDCs. It's none of the business of a central bank to run this. There are many other things that the central bank should do. It's in their mandate, at least in the European Central Bank's mandate, to have price control and to run the financial markets in a stable way. And that's basically it, full stop, nothing else. It doesn't have anything to do with the so-called Green Deal. It's none of the business of a central bank to running green finance, and it's also none of the business of a central bank to go into digitalization. And I will tell you a little bit later about that. But let's take a step back. Why? And you all know about Karl Menger. I don't have to tell you here at the Danube Institute who Karl Menger was. He was not only the teacher of Crown Prince Rudolf, but he was also, more importantly, the founder of the Austrian School of Economics. And his opus magnum, The Principles of Economics, turned economic theory upside down. But he was also a scholar on monetary policy and monetary theory. He published in 1892 his work on the origin of money, and I can only recommend it to you to look into it. He has some insights that are more valuable than ever these days. And I would like to start out with a quote by Karl Menger. "Money is not an invention of government. It is not the product of a legislative act. Even the sanction of political authority is not necessary for its existence." So keep that in mind. So if we ask ourselves what makes money good money, and what is the money that we use today, what it should kind of consist. So based on his principles, we can say that good money must be easy to transport and exchange, durable, backed by an actual commodity, stable, decentralized, divisible, and dependent on social and cultural factors. So if we check the boxes here, does our money, our current euro, the forint, whatever currency we are looking at, fulfill these tasks? Can we check the boxes for everything? I would doubt it. And I'm sure you come to the same conclusion. So money is a different product. It's a commodity that we have used for thousands of years in various forms. And I would just like to look a little bit onto the evolution of money, because this will be my point to going into what the central bank or the central banks in the world are doing right now. So, barter economy first, cash. Money in kind, cattle, gain, metals. Precious metals, the coinage. I mean, if we look at those wonderful old Roman coins that we have, and I always, for my students, have an Austrian golden coin with me to show the students and tell them, this is worth something, this has a value. And then, of course, we have paper money and central banks and fiat money. So over the time, with history, when the central banks took over the issuance of currency, and money often lost its direct link to precious metals, or actually it has lost its direct link. So fiat money, based on the people's trust and acceptance, became the predominant form of money. Central banks regulate the money supply and influence the economy through monetary policy. And then comes the next step, digital money and electronic payments. And when I'm criticizing CBDCs, I state always, it's a huge difference with private payment solutions in a digital form, or whatever comes up from top down, institutionalized by the central banks. So those are two entirely separate things. We always need to, if we talk to people about the values of cash and the importance of keeping cash alive, various forms of cash, and not going digital only, because choice is important, that the private forms that we know in terms of cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, and stable coins, you may name them, is a total different thing to what central banks are aiming for. So let's look at experiments that under future developments that we see these days. And this is actually coming to why central banks are also looking into CBDC, or had the idea of issuing digital currencies. And there's a term that Hayek labeled very carefully, competition. And all of a sudden, back then, when Facebook came up with the idea of issuing their own digital transaction means, central banks got alert and thought, oh, we need to do something about it. Somebody's taking away our job. This is actually nonsense. They did not, and they would not have done it. But it was the fear of some central bankers. This was when all of a sudden the Bank of England, Bank of Japan, the Fed, but in Europe, most importantly, the Swedish Reichsbank, they were leading ahead. Their path towards CBDCs got into the idea that they need to issue a digital currency. So the anonymity and digitalization of money is one first step. Crypto coins, stable coins can definitely do that. We have various forms of that, from bitcoins to altcoins. Dr. Rahn will tell you about something else, about aluminum coins and mining thereof and how he does that. But those are all tools that are being used within this kind of form of payments, of modern payment transactions. However, we keep forgetting that cash still is the only legal tender in the Eurozone. So despite the fact that we have all those digital forms of transactions and payments, this is still, at least in the contract, in the rules of conduct, the only form of transaction, legal form of transaction. So what have we learned from CBDCs so far? And before I go into detail, why the European Commission, and I say the European Commission, who has issued an act on the 28th of June as of last year, one on cash and the other one on CBDCs. And this is not not a law by yet, but it's currently in discussion. And being this all very political, they took a step back because we have the European elections coming up on 9th of June. So therefore, cash is still okay, and we will not mess around with your cash. That's what is being said. But I would rather say let's be careful. So the idea, and this is what the European Commission and the European Central Bank wants to say, they issue CBDCs because they want to promote financial innovation. The EU aims to promote it also with their recent issuing of this documents, but do we really need that if we look into detail? Then the cross-border payments. And cross-border payments have been working in the Eurozone and in the European Union over the past 20 years easily without any CBDC. So there is no reason for that to use it. Then the integration of cryptocurrencies would have been another idea. To look into, to push towards CBDCs. And then, of course, there is one other good excuse to focus on financial inclusion. So if we don't manage to educate our kids financially and economically with cash, do you think it's easier to educate them on a digital wallet? I ask you, cash is haptic. It's tangible. People, the young kids, know about it, and of course we keep forgetting the social role that cash has. Because if you're a grandparent and you give your kid your pocket money, you do it in cash. You will not wire it via Bitcoin or via stable coins or via, in the future, a CBDC to them, and then they can go and buy their ice cream. So this is nothing that we should look for. So there is actually no real reason why a central bank should push for digital currencies. Let's look where the Japanese are, what they are doing. So we had a meeting with Governor Ueda last July, and he said, Our main task right now is controlling the yield curve and see how we can manage that. We do have people in our central bank that work on CBDCs. We have tested it, we have worked on it, but it will take at least another couple of years before we will go out with that, and it's none of our priorities. China. The new governor of the central bank, whom we had the privilege to meet right after Weda, Mr. Pan, he was very clear, and they were very open in explaining the technological ideas that are behind the digital yuan. And for them, and this was very interesting for us as central bankers, they mentioned, we actually want to support the retail banks, because Tencent and Alipay are used all over the country and they are omnipresent in China, but the retail banks were kind of losing out. So this was for them a way to uplift the retail banks and give them room in the space in the competition for payment methods. And by now, you can use the digital yuan online, offline. You can use it as a wallet. You can use it as an account. You can use it tokenized. You can even use it, and this is what their ideas are. If you're a tourist coming or a business person coming to China, you may even download it on your own wallet and then be in the system. I will not say more of that. And privacy, of course, and when we were talking with the banks, but also with individuals, privacy is well protected. It's a two-tier system, whereby the People's Bank of China does not receive personal data. It is possible to have several user accounts, which is still in question in the Eurozone, in the European Central Bank, and most people have 2 accounts. And another interesting thing, at the beginning, they provided each and every individual with a certain incentive. They provided them with a certain number of yuan to be used and to get into the system. So the question is privacy really protected? The Chinese obviously don't care. We have our Digital Data Act, and we have a couple of other acts in the European Union. Also, the ECB tells us, of course, data will be protected. I will not comment on that. What is interesting, the impact on the money supply is, as the Chinese say, negligible, because it's 0.008% of M0. So then you can ask the question, why would you then use it at all if other forms of digital payment are already there? Coming back to Europe, Swedish Riksbank was the most advanced on that front. The last governor took a step back and said, we are not focusing on this right now. As a matter of fact, cash is back in the Nordic countries, not only due to COVID, but because of all security issues and safety issues. So they realized it is an important case to be made. And I would simply go through some reasons why the ECB says they need CBDCs. Ensure monetary policy autonomy in order to be independent from the transactions done via US and Great Britain. Strengthening the European independence and stability. Ensure the euro area-wide acceptance and availability. It's the evolution of money that I already mentioned before. And of course, the CBDC should ensure a high level of privacy protection. I simply ask you all, I think cash has the most protected, or is the most protected good. And there is one other thing that I would like to mention. Our financial markets only work if there is trust in the system. If we lose trust in the system, we're done. So what do we see these days with the design? And this is what the Governing Council is discussing currently at the ECB level. It will be that our digital currency will be person-to-person payments, online and offline, payments by consumers at the point of sale, and an online in e-commerce, payments to the state. And this is important because this is an incentive that is probably provided by the European Commission and the ECB to get people into the digital euro. So payments of taxes and, of course, subsidies are being possible in both ways to and from the government. Who can use the digital euro? Residents, retailers, authorities, as I mentioned already, euro area citizens abroad, and, of course, foreigners with euro accounts in a bank account. There are certain inventory limits because of the wallets per customer possible on the one hand. On the other hand, and I'm sure that this will be discussed by Dr. Banai in detail, the holding limits, the transaction limits. There is still questioning whether you can take interest on a digital wallet. Then, of course, and this is the biggest question, how much does a transaction cost? In this document that I was quoting before, it says approximately the same amount as other digital forms of payment that we are already using via credit cards, via bank cards. All those questions are still pending and are open. So how can you pay with the bank? And that's the interesting thing. And then you ask yourself especially, why would we need it? Because you use the banking app of the house bank, of your own retail bank, in order to have the your digital euro. You have a wallet with a third party, or you have a physical digital euros on your smartphone, offline wallet, or on the card. So those are the things where we stand these days. But from a pro-market, libertarian, freedom perspective, I would simply ask the question, and then I would end and hand over to Dr. Banai. What about privacy? What about protection of our individual rights? We cannot, because if this thing, we do not know yet if it's programmed or if it's run on an accounts. This is still officially in debate. But if it is programmable, then where do we end up? And that's a big question. And besides, and this is my last point here, monetary policy and fiscal policy have been thrown into one basket over the past, I would even say, almost 20 years. Especially after 2008, when the financial crisis hit Europe. Then it became really something where Frankfurt and Brussels were constantly interacting and intervening among each other. I'm not saying that in terms of crisis, coordination of monetary policy should not be done. But it's a huge difference whether you coordinate or whether you constantly cooperate. And fiscal policy has to be kept apart from monetary policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation. In the next few minutes, I will talk a little bit about the concept of the central bank digital currency. So I take a step back and show the concept, show the reasons why central banks started to work on it, and show some few information on what the ECB, what the Fed, and what the People's Bank of China did in the last few years regarding this very long-term and very new project. So when we are talking about central bank digital currency, everybody is thinking of something which is about digitalization of finance. But from my perspective, central bank digital currency is not really about digitalization, although at the end of the day, it will be a digital solution. So, for example, when you will see the project of People Bank of China, you will see a screen of a mobile phone, which is very digital. But the essence of the story is not digitalization. It's about having a direct connection with the central bank as a real economic participant. So the common method now for central banks that as a central bank we have direct connection only with the financial market participants, and not all of them actually. So in Hungary we have a direct connection with the banks and with some licensed credit institutions, but we don't really have many partners, and we have a kind of direct connection with the people of Hungary and some foreign people who are in Hungary when they are using the cash, because cash is in on the liability side of the central bank. But central bank digital currency is about changing this type of model on a certain way, and there are three ways in the literature now. A direct model when people have a direct connection, a kind of hybrid model when there is some operator which is between the real economic actor and the central bank, and in indirect model, which is actually quite the same what we have but today, but it makes a step forward. And although there are different models and different thoughts about central bank digital currency around the globe, but what is important to see is that most of the big countries are working on this project on a very different manner actually, and in a very different phases, but many of the countries launched at least a pilot project or make research, or there are some who cancelled actually the project of CBDC, and there are some others who launched an actual CBDC. And I will talk about the big central banks, but there are smaller examples like I think Barbados has a cent dollar, which is an actual working CBDC, and the reason behind it is more like a logistical problem with the cash, since the country is made of thousands of very small islands. So cash circulation in practice is very hard because you have to reach very different parts of the countries, which are kind of abandoned islands. So this is the reason why they started. And there can be some other motivation why to start a CBDC, and these motivation can be very different. So it can be a logistical problem, as I mentioned. It can be some some type of facilitate of innovation in the banking sector, especially since there are many innovation in the financial sector, and not just from regular and original type of participants like banks, but from participants like big tech companies, which are far from the classic banking sector, and they are not regulated as the banks. So there are some new participants, and facilitating innovation within the regulated banking sector might be also an interesting and important aspect of starting a CBDC. In the last 2 years, especially since the new inflationary period of the world started, the efficiency of monetary policies also became a question, and it became also a reason why to start a CBDC. So in a nutshell, there can be many different reasons why some central banks started to think of launching a CBDC, and these many different reasons may build up different type of business cases for CBDCs. And I was talking about these reasons, but let's see some examples for these reasons. So, for example, the structure of payment and settlement system, especially on an international level, can be a reason why it is a very concentrated market and still far from an effectively working market. So if you think about the examples of different countries, think about what we have in Hungary, and many of you may know that we have an instant payment system in Hungary, which means that until a very high amount of money, you can make a transaction within 5 seconds. So it actually works wonderful. But when we want to make transaction out of the countries, we have to go to the SEPA, go through the SEPA system, which can take 2-3 days. So it can be very slow. So there, especially in the international level, there can be frictions, and a potential solution can be an international type of CBDC. Also, there are cryptocurrencies. I don't know whether you are trading with cryptocurrencies or not, but cryptocurrencies became very popular in the last 5 years, and it was also a threat towards the traditional payment and settlement system. Although, as you see, this very volatile chart, the role of cryptocurrencies in the financial system can change from one day to another very abruptly. What is very interesting is the efficiency of the monetary policy. So what is the goal of the monetary policies in a nutshell? We set an interest rate for the banking sector, and we want to see that interest rate in all the parts of the economy. And what has happened in the last 2 years with this new inflationary period is that most of the central banks increased their interest rates because of inflation, and especially on the deposit side, interest rates what the customers meet on the deposit side didn't really follow this interest rate, and the reason was the tons of liquidity which was pushed in the system, or this was one reason behind this phenomenon. But all in all, it means that probably the transmission mechanism has weakened in the last 2 years in many different economies. And based on some thoughts, CBDC can be a solution for more efficient transmission. What is very important is the banking of the unbanked people. Actually, this is a problem of most of the countries. In Hungary, we face with it, but in several other countries, we see that 20-30% of the people don't really access the banking sector, and there can be several reasons. But what we have seen that one reason probably behind it is the price of this type of services, and probably lower cost or a free service for this customer may help to access the financial sector. And why it is important for all the people to access the financial sector, because when some people are unbanked and cannot access the financial sector, is not only about their intention to access the financial sector. In many cases, it is about the inability to access the financial sector, and they still have some need for financial products, and in some cases they will meet these type of needs in the, I would say, illegal type of financial sector, which can be very dangerous. So this is a very important social aspect. So there are many different reasons, and with different type of solutions, probably a central bank digital currency may help to solve these problems. And let's see how it may work. So we are usually talking about CBDC as it is something, it is one thing. But CBDC is much more complex, since many different decisions have to be made before launching a CBDC. And based on this decision, it is different CBDCs can diverge a lot. So the first question is, what is the fundamental goal? It is facilitating innovation, it is banking the unbanked, or it is about making a more efficient transmission. And based on this decision, you have to answer the next question: who is able to transact with? It is a small amount of people, or all the people, or the companies, or just the companies, or it is for cross-border participants, so for just other countries and participants for the other countries. The big question Barbara was also talking about, the monetary policy nature. So what we think of from a monetary policy point of view about the CBDC, should it be neutral, which means that it is not an interest paying tool, or should it pay an interest rate, which is a totally different thing. The form, will it replace the cash, or will it replace the bank account? It is also an important question, especially from a financial stability point of view, because you have to keep it in mind that if you want to replace the bank account, then the traditional banking system will face huge challenges regarding their liquidity. The framework is a big question. I think one of the biggest questions is the anonymity, whether it's private or not, and the success of a CBDC. So the anonymity is one of the key aspects to be successful or not, because probably many of the people who are using cash, and if you want to replace cash, you have to keep in mind that all those people who want to hold cash probably want to have an anonym type of CBDC, because other way they won't use it. And it's also a question, if you have an anonym CBDC as a central bank, would the people believe you that it is really anonym? And it is a real trust issue. And this is also a proof for CBDC is not about technology, is that the last question is the technological solution. It is not really about the technology, although there are some debates whether it should be a blockchain or DLT type of solution or not. But this is not the biggest question. And let's go just for very few seconds what we have seen from the biggest central banks in the last years. So the the People's Bank of China started a pilot version, and one of the reasons for them is the innovation and those innovative participants out of the banking sector who became very big in the payment system, like Alipay. One of the other reasons is more like a geographical and social issue, that many customers and many people in China cannot be really reached with the traditional banking sector because they are living in the mountains, and we are talking about hundreds of millions of people. And they started this pilot project with a small number of people, of 140 million people who are using it. And as you can see, it's truly a working application, and you can pay with it. And for sure, they are monitoring their experiences on this issue. The Federal Reserve also started some research on CBDC, but it is still hard to see the directions of the US CBDC. What we know is that financial inclusion and cross-border payments are two big challenges the US want to solve via their CBDC project. And at the end, just few words about the ECB's progress since they started about 4 years ago, and they are in the middle of the preparation phase. They made a huge survey on people, what they think of the CBDC and what are the most important aspects for them. And the three most important aspects were keeping the privacy, to be secure. So when the central bank step in, the central bank have to ensure the security. So it is probable advantage of a CBDC that a central bank is safer than any of the commercial banks, and no additional cost. So the cost factor can be very important. And this is where they are standing. And based on this information, they started to go further with their project. But since I talked a lot, I stop here. And thank you for the attention, and we will continue. Thanks.
Okay. First of all, thank you to both our speakers. Really substantial discussion. I think we're blessed that there's perhaps a little bit of disagreement, which makes everything more interesting in a way. So I'll just say what kind of stood out to me most from the two presentations, the kind of overlapping themes. In a previous life, I was in asset management. I was on the private sector side, managing pension funds and so on. And I can tell you that when you go and you meet your client, you put on a suit. And why do you put on a suit? Because you want to build trust. As Dr. Combs said, finance is all about trust. It's trust, trust, trust. Even when you back money with gold, the gold is just there to provide trust. It could be full of tungsten bars, for example. That's actually a real thing, financial markets, because you can replicate the weight of gold with tungsten. So really it's all about trust. And from Dr. Banai's presentation, I think the key slide that stood out to me was, I think it was the first or the second, where you're removing the intermediary. Central banks, I would summarize, are banks of banks. They're not really banks for the public. If you go into a local bank, that's a bank for you. It's for business people, for private citizens, and so on. Central banks are created as banks of banks. And it seems to me that the core motivation for digital currencies is to remove that intermediary layer and bank directly with the public. So that raises questions, I think, because ultimately the intermediary layer means that you can choose who you bank with, and that means that to some extent you can trust them, because if you don't trust them, you can go elsewhere. So I'd say I'd open it up. I mean, I'll try to play moderator here and not let my own opinions interfere. But I suppose first to Dr. Combe, what would you say to, how would I phrase this? Do you think removing that intermediary layer could impact public trust in the banking system?
No, it will do exactly the opposite for various reasons, because we as individuals have learned that we can trust the person who I know. I know the banker, my retail banker. I discuss with him, I talk with him. He knows me, he knows my documents. I mean, the KYC is another issue, but it's going much further with all the regulations. So I would say, no, it actually destroys the system of trust that we have had with those individuals that we have interacted and that we have been working with. When it comes from a client or from an individual to banking perspective, when it comes from B2B, business to business, then of course it's different because you have a different variety of choices. But again, the intermediary is important. And the thing is, and this is what actually has not been publicly said. If you look into those documents that have been issued on the 28th of June last year, it clearly says there will be fees. So the question is then, who will pay the price for those additional fees? Will it be the customer in the end, or will it maybe be the bank, the retail bank? And the most important thing that why I put a big question mark is, in our banking system in Europe has built up trust after the big 2008 crisis. They have built up their cash reserves. They have built up. They have reduced their balance sheets so far. They are kind of in a much better condition than they used to be. So why would they create an entirely new business model or invent a new business model? Because if the bank of the banks, the central banks comes in with something that banks already do, namely the provision of cash, namely the payment, the entire payments, handling the entire payment system, why would then the retail banks or the banks exist? So this is the big question mark, and this is why, especially I think in the United States, but correct me if I'm wrong, there has not been so much fuss about the Fed stepping in and producing the digital dollar yet. And because they do have their own interests. And the intermediary here always, and we have known that from experience in many other cases, always creates additional costs.
So, Dr. Banai, I suppose I'll put the same question to you in a sense. Well, I'll put it twofold. So, how do you see this issue of trust? I mean, obviously, if the central bank take over a lot of these roles and something goes wrong, losing trust in the central bank could be very deleterious for public policy and so on. And secondly, what role do you see for private banking system within this? Do you see it disappear, or is there still a role for it?
So, I think trust is one question, and as I showed in the presentation, that there might be many different issues which can be solved, or probably can be solved, by the central bank digital currency. So trust is one issue. Efficiency of the monetary policy can be another issue. The financial technology or financial innovations what appeared in the last years in the financial system can be another one, and there are a few others. So I think in the last about 10 years the financial system changed a lot. After the global financial crisis, there were big trust issue all over the world, and also in the last few years we have seen the Silicon Valley Bank case, the Credit Suisse, and others. So this is one part of the story, but the others is that in this changing environment we had many new questions regarding the structure of the financial system, and this is the reason why many people started to think of what is the right solution for these new challenges. And I don't say that CBDC is the right solution, because it's still a question. We have more questions than answers, and it is not surprising that the People's Bank of China was the first who started really with a big amount of people their CBDC, because stepping in as a central bank in China is very different from what it would be in Europe or in the United States, because they are not the two-tier banking system what we have. So all in all, I think it is a right question whether solving the trust issue can be made only by the CBDC. Especially if we go back to the 90s in Hungary, trust issue was also a big question, since when in the 90s the privatization of the banking sector started in Hungary, it was a big question whether to privatize the whole banking sector, or just small part of it, to keep in state hand, because state banks can be trusted more than others. And the answer was, not just in Hungary, but in the whole region, is that with regulation you can solve this problem, and you don't need state ownership. So it's pretty much similar. And just a sentence to your other question, what would be the role of the traditional banking sector? So it really depends on the way you build up CBDC. As if it's only a cash replacing type of CBDC, the role of the traditional banking system would be pretty much the same what they have today.
But that will definitely, obviously, not be the case. And I would even go a little bit further, and I would go back to your point, which is innovation. And we have seen financial innovation from the private sector over and over again over the past decades. And there is even, if you check the boxes again of why the ECB is promoting CBDCs, we have private companies in Europe that can actually already fulfill exactly those tasks. And why then would we give it to the central bank and not allow the markets? And we are here, at least I am here as a defender of markets and competition. Why would we then not allow the private sector to solve this problem? And we've seen from experience that they can solve all these problems more efficient and more effective. They solve the information problem for us. And I think this is something that it's, again, not that in the mandate and not in the task of the central bank. And with regards to China, I mean, those 8 provinces where they have implemented the digital yuan, China cannot be compared with our Western banking systems, with our Western worlds. Also when it comes to privacy and when it comes to obedience to the government and to the state. And then we come back to the big question, what is the task of the government? What is the task of the central bank? And a central bank is not the central bank. I mean, the Fed system is totally different to our ECB system, which people completely forget. And for example, even in our Euro system, the Bank of Italy, the Central Bank of Italy is owned by the Italian banks. It's not a government-owned bank, whereas our Austrian central bank is owned now by the taxpayer because the banks were sold out. So it's totally, you can't compare apples with oranges. So it's very complex, and I prefer to let the market solve those issues of digital payments if people want to use it. You made a couple of very excellent points for those who are not banked. For those people, this solution is there in a private system as well. It's not the task of a central bank to provide digital payment means of payment. And one last point, the ECB actually is very advanced when it comes, because Madame Lagarde's idea is to put this into practice in 2028. This is what the current timeline is around. And we are already at the point where the legal framework is being discussed within the central banks, from ECB to the central banks, but also from the central banks to the banks, of how things will be operated, what will be the legal framework. And so it's pretty much advanced. And then I think she has made it her mission. I don't read her mind. So I assume it is in her mission that when Madame Lagarde will step down, or maybe will be reappointed in 2028, that she has put the digital euro in place. And that's a big question mark for everybody else.
Okay, well, I'll try and push back then on those points. I think so you're making the claim that the private bank system works relatively well, and that the competition within that does its job. Well, Dr. Banai's presentation pretty clearly showed that that's not actually the case. As you showed, the monetary policy transmission mechanism seems to be broken for whatever reason. And we all know this. The deposit rates have not caught up with the bank rates, and that's completely unfair if you understand how banking works. So what would you say to that aspect of the presentation?
Political intervention. This is exactly what we have seen Frankfurt and Brussels are way too close and it has been intervened constantly. I mean, if we look back, and you mentioned the interest rates, I mean, we've had interest rates going down from the 2000s onwards until they finally went down to zero in 2008, and then they became negative. And we've been, I have been criticizing that the ECB has been way too late and way too little in picking up interest rates and going up again in order to solve the not only the inflation problems, but in order to give signals to the markets. And this has not happened. So it's a very political concept these days, and it should not be. And this is why I started out with Menga at the beginning.
I think we have 5 minutes, so we may as well open the floor to questions. I see one here.
Thank you for the great panel. But I think the trust issue is much more fundamental than most of the people think, actually. By the way, congratulations for the 100th anniversary of the Magyar Central Bank. Bulgaria's central bank is 145 years. And in this 145 years, the distrust in the central bank of Bulgaria was very much present, you know, in many situations. But the problem is, if you have central bank digital currencies, it brings the trust in the central bank, or the honesty or the soundness of that monetary policy on a different level. And this is a trust into a monopoly issuer. So with a monopoly issuer and the trust in that, the only effect would be less trust in the users of currency, be this international or national. And it's very simple, and it's very basic. And it comes, you know, from your Adam list of 6 whatever goals and 4 motivations of digital currencies by the central bank. And the only thing which will be a dominant motivator will be stimulating, you know, some political and government whatever priorities. So, in my point of view, the entire issue comes, you know, from lack of thinking of how to privatize the issuance of currencies or privatize the central banks.
My issue is abuse, control and abuse. And by abuse, I mean what happened in Canada, where Trudeau went into the bank accounts of not only the protesters, but people who were internationally contributing to their well-being, to support their family. Their bank accounts were frozen. So how on earth are we going to be able to trust a central authority to not play games like that? And, you know, and in the United States, you have, I believe it's Bank of America, giving out information to the FBI about people who they thought should be given out information about. In other words, the FBI never asked them for the information. They actually offered it to the FBI. Now, how on earth are we going to stop that kind of abuse from occurring?
Yeah, so this is what I mentioned is about the anonymity, is that anonymity is can be ensured by the technology. Actually, this is true, but the question is not whether you can ensure the anonymity by the technology. The question is whether everybody believes in it, and I doubt that that many people believes in it. But I think what is also important that. In Hungary, it is the case, and I don't know what is the case in Canada. But in Hungary, the central bank is much more trusted by the people than, for example, the commercial banks. Although it is still a question if the role of the central bank would change, this trust would be or could be kept in this level what we have today, especially because trust is not only about this structural thing that the central bank cannot default in its own currency, which is true by definition, but trust is about how you work, and building trust is very hard when you have direct customers. For example, it is a very operational question, but still a question. If you have a direct connection with the customers, what would you do? Will you build up a call center as well? Will you have subsidiaries or branches in the country? And you have to serve the people, which will really change the behavior of the customers or the thinking of the central bank. So yeah, this is very true that we don't really know in advance how this trust issue will go further if we launch this type of system.
Even without the CBDCs, we have seen it in Cyprus and we have seen it in Greece during the GFC. Plus, and I will stop there, the European Commission, when we as Austrians, for example, or the Germans joined the euro, we gave our kind of hands on our currency away. We outsourced all the power both to the Commission on the one hand and then also to the ECB. So as nation states, we don't have anything, we don't have a say, and whatever changes in Brussels, you don't know, and you don't have it directly in your hands. So that's an issue of, again, trust and democracy, and how far will democracy go.
Okay, well, I think we're up on time there. We're nearly 3 minutes over, so I failed at my job already. So I'd like to thank our speakers. That was a fantastic presentation. It was really substantive, I thought, and thank you all for coming.
Philip, you didn't fail at all. We started a little late, so you actually have done beautifully. Thank you all very much. And now the first panel vacates the stage, and the second panel will come up, and Mr. Anton Bendarzhevsky. Did I do it? Yay! 10 years. 10 years it took me. With O Economist Economic Research Foundation in Hungary will be our second panel moderator. Thank you very much. Let's welcome Anton.
Thank you very much, Melissa. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for the Danube Institute for the invitation. So I'd like to ask our next panelists to come to the stage. First of all, Dr. Richard Wren, economist and entrepreneur from United States. Then we have Stephen Klimchuk-Meschen, senior advisor member of the advisory board, Kansuk International from Canada. And we have a speaker from Chile, Dr. Jose Piñera, economist, former government minister of Chilean pension plan. Please welcome our speakers at the stage. So each of the speakers will have exactly, or at most 20 minutes to make the presentation, and I will try to be very strict on that. And after that, we'll have another 20 minutes for discussions and also questions from the audience. So on this regard, I would like to ask Dr. Richard Wren to have his presentation.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me to be here. I first came to Hungary. I was here when I was chief economist, U.S. Chamber, and the Reagan administration, Hungarian government had sponsored something. It was about 1984, still under the communists. I didn't think Hungary was very nice then. And then I came in 1988, 1989, and I was part of the Reform Commission, and we made remarkably great changes. And I guess it's been about 20 years since I have been here, and it's just wonderful to see countries go from the gruesome part of communism to free market democracies with a high level of prosperity. And you've got a great country, and I've enjoyed my little time here again. I actually only have two fundamental points that I'm going to make, and then I'll talk about the way out a little bit, see if I do this right. Melissa gave me instructions, but I'm old and I forget my instructions quickly.
The U.S. government can't go bankrupt because we can print our own money.
It obviously begs the question, why exactly are we borrowing in a currency that we print ourselves? I'm waiting for someone to stand up and say, why do we borrow our own currency in the first place?
Like you said, they print the dollar, so why does the government even borrow?
Well, again, some of this stuff gets, some of the language that some of the language and concepts are just confusing. I mean, the government definitely prints money, and it definitely lends that money, which is why the government definitely prints money, and then it lends that money by selling bonds. Is that what they do? They sell bonds. Yeah, they sell bonds, right? Because they sell bonds and people buy the bonds and lend them the money. Yeah. So a lot of times, at least to my ear with MMT, the language and the concepts can be kind of unnecessarily confusing. But there is no question that the government prints money, and then it uses that money to I guess I can't really talk. I don't get it. I don't know what they're talking about. Because it's like the government clearly prints money. It does it all the time, and it clearly borrows. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this debt and deficit conversation. So, I don't think there's anything confusing there.
That man is Jared Bernstein, who I have debated at times. He is President Biden's chief economist, chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. Now, you may think sometimes you pick up your newspaper that people in Washington and Brussels and London and so forth have no idea what they're doing. They don't. That's proof. I mean, that man is supposed to be Biden's economic brains, and Biden doesn't have any brains of his own, as you know. And so we're hoping to get through the next 6 months, but it is truly appalling what's going on. My basic point is that global debt has been growing very rapidly and has now reached unsustainable levels. For years, we've said, well, countries can't keep borrowing, and at some point, they'll hit the wall. The wall is now here. And I don't have Hungary here, do I? Oh, yes, 73. So the Hungarians and the Austrians are still in the livability range. Once you get above 50%, that's not good. Jose, what's it in Chile? You know?
That number?
Yeah.
39%.
See, the Chileans are very responsible because they have a Jose Piñera who keeps their feet to the grinding stone. But anyway, this has grown extremely rapidly. Under Reagan, it was less than 50% in the U.S., and it had been low, and I'll show you later slides, up to about the last 15 years or so, and particularly at the time of the pandemic, it absolutely took off. Now, so it's worldwide it's taken off. Japan, their debt GDP ratio is 260%. And the Japanese have an odd system where they have an extremely high savings rates and savings are recycled. But what this has done is led to economic stagnation in Japan. Let me start off very basically. People save. Those savings can go into productive investment, we call productive capital formation. That's building new plants, equipments. It can be a semiconductor plant. It can be a McDonald's. It can be all kinds of things that generate future wealth. Or they can put it into government bonds. And the government bonds, for the most part, have already been, the money's been spent on transfer payments. There's no wealth creation. And as you have a shift of savings from productive uses into government bonds, economic growth tends to slow because you're depriving the economy of the seed corn. In the U.S., well, first we'll take a look at a couple of the other numbers. Japan, basically economic stagnation. Italy, close to stagnation. Greece, less than stagnation. The Greeks have been suffering for years and they still haven't gotten out of it because they spent more than they could produce, and you can't do that forever. And if those of you who've been to Greece, you know the problems. The average Greek has an income about 30% lower than they did a dozen years ago. And that's terrible. And you talk to Greeks, and they don't like this. We see that Spain, the UK, France are all above 100% of debt to GDP. The ratio, the US is about 121%. Now, a share of that, about a quarter, is owned by government agencies. So it's not quite as bad as it seems, but it's getting worse. And once you get debt over about 100% held by the public, because you're borrowing more, you're paying more in interest. In the U.S., what we have is a situation where we are now paying fairly high rates of interest. Higher than, when I say fairly high, higher than most of the rest of the world on our debt. But our economy is still growing. Now, how is that possible? It's possible because the rest of the world is funding our debt. I'm going to have some more slides showing this. But I want you to think this thing through for a second. You have a Nigerian, let's say a little entrepreneur. He's a rice miller, got a little rice milling company. He saves a little bit of his money. So he puts his savings into a local Nigerian bank. The Nigerian bank has a corresponding banking relationship with a bank like HSBC. HSBC is a primary bank, so it buys U.S. government bonds with that money because they get a higher rate of interest and it's perceived as safe. So you have this guy that's struggling along in Nigeria, farmers all over the world and small entrepreneurs sending their money to the U.S. to buy U.S. bonds. They don't understand they're doing that, but indirectly that's how the whole system works. And so I spent half my year in Miami. If you've been in Miami or state of Florida recently, it's absolutely boom. We're building new 100-story buildings, just building after building with multi-million-dollar condos. We're living extremely well in Miami. Who's funding that lifestyle? Some poor guy in Somalia or Nigeria or Southeast Asia. Their money, their savings are going and subsidizing my lifestyle. In the old days, going back just a few decades ago, rich countries sent money to poor countries to build infrastructure. The British, for instance, built railroads all over the world. They built much of the U.S. railroads, Canadian, Australia, New Zealand, in South America. They built all these railroads. That was capital. The British had more savings than they could use productively at home. They sent it off, and those railroads greatly increased productivity in other parts of the world and lifted those people up. But we're doing the opposite. Now we're having the poor people subsidize the rich people rather than the rich people subsidizing the poor people. This chart is rather interesting too, because at the end of World War II, the U.S. accounted for about 30% of world GDP. And that slowly declined as the rest of the world recovered, particularly Europe had been decimated, but then it grew rapidly in the 50s and 60s, and it took some of an increased share of the world GDP. The big change, of course, was China, starting about 30 years ago, which grew extremely rapidly and went from about 5% of world GDP up to 27, 28% or something. And 5 years ago, everybody's saying, how long is it going to be before China overtakes the U.S.? Well, a strange thing happened. Economic growth really faltered in China. They have this huge housing bubble and other problems, and yet it was rising in the U.S. as a share of world GDP because we were taking the rest of the world's capital. So you have this bizarre situation of the richest country in the world is getting richer, and all these other countries are getting relatively poor. It shows here the pandemic, the huge increase in public debt during the pandemic, but also you see that private debt is rising very rapidly also throughout the world. See, you have me intimidated. I'm so afraid I'll run over time here. Well, there's a lot of slides here about the U.S. Maybe I'll go back to this one a second. You see, the Federal Reserve started buying U.S. securities. I don't have time today to explain the arcane monetary system we have in the U.S., but basically what it was that the Treasury would run a deficit each month. They would issue more Treasury bills or notes or bonds, but this could not be sold to the public at large. They had to go to auction to what we call primary dealers, 6 big banks, and then the Fed would operate this whole auction system and immediately buy the bonds back from the banks. Anyway, it's a mess, but you see now the Fed is just buying for their own account. It means the government, Bernstein was right in one thing. Yes, the government is printing money. This shows money printing. This shows foreign holdings of U.S. public debt. You can see back in 1970, it was quite small, 5%. Now it's 30% or more. Who holds this debt? Well, the Chinese are the biggest single holder. They hold more than $1 trillion. The Japanese, about $800 billion. And when you go through the detailed charts, which I won't bother with today, but when you say places like Switzerland and the United Kingdom and Ireland holding a lot of the debt, this is because other countries invest through these entities, like to go through the city of London, Jersey, and Guernsey because they're not taxed on it. The big area was the Cayman Islands. Cayman Islands holds a huge amount of U.S. government debt when you look at the official numbers. I used to be on the board of the Cayman Island Monetary Authority. We had about 50,000 people in Cayman. 3 trillion, that's with a T, $3 trillion went through Cayman each year. And the Caymans, they're listed as holding over $300 billion in debt. Now, that's not held by 50,000 people there in Cayman. That is held by the real owners, are primarily people in Latin America, not Chile, but you go to Argentina, Brazil, other places, because you don't want to keep your money there. So you send up through Cayman because Cayman, there's no tariffs going in and out. You can send the money without any fees at all, no taxes. So it's warehoused in Cayman by the big banks. They collect it. Well, I'll give you an example. A French dentist has a little savings. He puts it in a local bank in France, a local city branch bank. And that money then Citibank sends down to Cayman, to their bank in Cayman, at zero cost, instantaneously, electronically, and they sum all the other monies from the various French dentists, and then they take that and they build a shopping center or a semiconductor plant or something in the U.S. And so when you look at all these official numbers, without understanding what's really underneath, they're not terribly meaningful either. This just shows for the international investors. This is the interest cost. These interest costs, we're now paying more on interest on U.S. government debt than we're spending on defense. And at some point, the interest costs crowd out all the other government spending. You can see it in the U.S., but it's also true with all the major European countries. And even though the government budgets have grown a whole lot, they're all cutting back on defense because they're spending it all on interest and transfer payments. And shows the shift in how government is being spent. The bottom thing here is Social Security. Jose will give you the answer to how to stop all that. And he has stopped it in 46 countries. Federal debt held by the public. You can just see where it's going. Again, this isn't going to happen because it can't happen. Inflation rates by presidents, this is fine for a U.S. audience, but I'll bother here. This is the most important curve in the slides here, because this is the one thing I'm in a number of textbooks about. Others label it the Ryan curves. Actually, Peter Brimlin or Forbes did this 25 years ago, because that was the first one who had detailed out the relationship between government spending and economic growth. I did that back in the 1980s, and the data has supported since, and a lot of think tanks, including the one in Bulgaria, have done updates of the data showing that is true. And as government gets bigger, beyond some point, economic growth slows, and finally it stops. And I'm in with my allotted time.
You have like 3 minutes?
You
have like 2-3 minutes?
Good, okay. I have a solution to a lot of this, a partial solution. One is the previous panel, they were talking about money. I have a company in Miami where we're doing digital aluminum because government monies, there's nothing behind them. You may have noticed that. You have higher rates of inflation. And so we wanted to come up with something that was real. But every time you call something money, like I've had friends who have gold backs money, and they call it gold money, and then the U.S. government officials come down and say, no, we have a monopoly on money. Even though they don't in our Constitution, they claim the monopoly on money. And so having been a regulator myself and knowing the regulatory mentality, I was trying to figure out how do we get around this? So rather than doing a precious metal, which the governments can always claim is money, I decided to use a base commodity. And aluminum, you can go in U.S. local hardware stores or Home Depot stores, building supply stores, and you can buy sheets of aluminum. Now what happens if we took that aluminum and we digitized it and tokenized it? So in Miami, we have warehouses there where we purchase aluminum, put it in, and we digitized and tokenized it. And you can trade an aluminum coin. We call it Luminian coin. And we're still in experimental stage with this because we have the endless fight with the Securities and Exchange Commission, which wants to call anything a security, and because they, quote, regulate security. We're saying it's not a security, it's aluminum. It's no different than what you have in a Home Depot and so forth. So we have that battle going on. But I'm actively trying to solve at least part of the problem with a private company. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleagues.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ran. I would like to ask our next speaker, Mr. Stefan Klimczuk-Maszyn, to present his presentation.
Thank you. So my presentation is more personal, less technical. I'm a Polish-Canadian Californian who used to live in Switzerland, and I currently live in Canada on Canada's Hawaii, Vancouver Island, so I've come a long way. And the title of my talk is Rebooting the Free Market in the Anglosphere and the Case of Ozanada. It's easy for people to think of the English-speaking countries as the natural home of the free market economy. After all, as this image of Adam Smith shows, the very ideas underpinning modern private enterprise seem to have been born there and have flourished there as nowhere else. And as with this iconic image from the United States, there's no way like the American way, world's highest standard of living. America in particular has long taken pride in being the best and most robust exemplar of a free economy in a free society. But in the changed world of 2024, has the Anglosphere lost its way, having re-embraced big government and become locked into its own version of statism? I would argue that we are in a moment not very different from 1947, when it appeared the future would be collectivist, with billions of lives improved through state planning and state intervention. As I think most of you know, in April 1947, 39 contrarians gathered in the little village of Le Mont-Pelerin in Switzerland to try to turn back this powerful tide by the force of ideas. And against all odds, they succeeded over the following decades. Amongst the 39 were, of course, such luminaries as Friedrich von Hayek, Ludwig von Mises, Milton Friedman, and Wilhelm Röpke, the founding fathers of what was to become the influential Mont Pelerin Society. I myself am proud to be an elected member of the society, and I think the only member ever to have actually lived in this little Swiss village. Maybe the reason I got elected. For 5 blissful years in the 1990s, this was basically my view from the top of the Mont Pelerin high above Lake Geneva. As a young person in the 1980s, I came of age at a time when it appeared the ideas of the Mont Pelerin founding fathers had finally and decisively triumphed. As an undergraduate, I studied economics at UCLA, sometimes dubbed the University of Chicago at Los Angeles, given the notably free market orientation of its economics department, and I followed that up with a Harvard MBA at a time when the ideas of Hayek and his colleagues were no longer contrarian. My classmates and I read the best-selling book, What They Don't Teach You at Harvard Business School, and we used to joke that we now knew everything. We knew what they did teach you at Harvard Business School and what they didn't teach you. Perhaps there was a bit of youthful arrogance at work during those optimistic go-go years. Certainly, in the age of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, the ideas of Hayek, Friedman, and the Chicago boys seemed to have won what appeared to be a permanent victory, especially when the Berlin Wall came down and Soviet communism dissolved along with the USSR. Forbes magazine, which I note was mentioned by Richard in the past presentation, was then a must-read for aspiring business leaders, proudly calling itself the capitalist tool, and had a helicopter, yacht, private jet, and Fabergé egg-studded art collection to go with its swagger and worldly success. Today, sadly, the Forbes media business is a near-failed shadow of its former glory, and socialism is cool again, especially with young people. Where did we go wrong, including in the once robustly free market Anglosphere? This is a recent photo taken at Harvard, in Harvard Yard next to the famous John Harvard statue, where the inmates appear to have taken over the asylum. Is it still an institution devoted to the fearless pursuit of knowledge and even veritas, that is truth, the university motto? I have my doubts. As students, we jokingly called the John Harvard statue the statue of three lies. That's not him on the plinth, as no one knows what he actually looked like. It says he's the founder of the university, which isn't true, as he was only a benefactor, and they even got the date wrong on the inscription. Somehow those falsehoods seem a particularly good fit with much of the direction of academia today. As for UCLA, which is normally known for its immaculately groomed and picture-perfect landscaping, it appears here in a rather sorry state after its own recent violent campus disturbances. And I must say the English-speaking countries aren't even particularly good at statism and soft socialism, unlike the French. Look at this photo of France's best and brightest, undergraduates at the extremely elite École Polytechnique, where they are being trained to run the country in the decades to come. They wear these lovely Napoleonic-style uniforms on gala occasions, including in the parade on Bastille Day. Their careers are assured, so no wonder they're smiling. France was, of course, already centralizing well before the French Revolution. And if the government wants superb high-speed trains and first-rate nuclear power, it just makes it happen. But the Anglosphere has a different culture and a different tradition. Decentralized, evolutionary, and based on common sense and individual initiative. My book of last year, published in May 2023, shown here, focuses on how the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand still form a distinct community of nations and a distinct subgroup within the English-speaking world. In June of last year, The Economist magazine ran a story with this curious image of a half-moose, half-kangaroo creature, and made the case that Canada and Australia are actually one country and one economy. They called it Ausanada, though I think Canstralia sounds better. Together, the two polities form the world's fifth largest economy, larger than India's and just behind Germany's. Both have vast land masses, relatively small populations, are rich in natural resources, are magnets for immigration, and remain Commonwealth realms that share a head of state, King Charles III. It's true that they have some cultural differences in addition to their many similarities. As you may know, Australians can be feisty in their warm weather environment, whereas we Canadians are stereotypically polite and quiet in our cold northern half of the North American continent. More problematically, both Australians and Canadians seem too comfortable having economies where competition is limited, where oligopolies and cartels dominate, and where foreign entrants face high barriers to entry. Perhaps you'll recognize some of these bank logos, with the Canadian banks on the left and the Australian ones on the right. In banking, Australia's four biggest banks have some 3/4 of the domestic market, while Canada's big five banks own over 90% of the market. It's said that Canada's banking system is the world's strongest, and maybe that's true. Indeed, it barely wobbled during the 2008 global financial crisis. It's also highly profitable, given the relatively high fees which Canadian customers pay. Airlines are a duopoly in both countries, Air Canada and WestJet in Canada, and Qantas and Virgin Australia in Australia. Based on the model of the BBC, Canada's Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, or CBC, and Australia's Australian Broadcasting Corporation, or ABC, remain influential national broadcasters with a particular message. In telecoms, both countries have a triopoly. Again, the Canadian one's on the left, the Australian one's on the right. Though some Canadians, I won't say whether I'm one of them, circumvent the country's limited options and get cheaper mobile phones and phone plans in the United States. What is euphemistically called supply management has also been a common feature of both countries, even if Australia has now largely left supply management behind. In Canada, consumers still pay a premium for milk, butter, eggs, and poultry as price supports and limits on production enrich producers at the expense of ordinary shoppers. However, the monopolies once represented by the Canadian Wheat Board and Australian Wheat Board are now a thing of the past, although you'll see their logos and typography quite the same. Both Canada and Australia have world-class universities, as with the top-ranked, or currently top-ranked, universities of Toronto and Melbourne. But their economies remain anchored in natural resources rather than brainpower industries. Still, the occasional innovation-driven technology wunderkind does appear, as with Canada's Shopify. I'm an investor in Shopify. My wife is a bit of a stock picker. Unfortunately, we got in early. The e-commerce giant founded in 2006 that is arguably doing for retailers around the world what Amazon has done for consumers. With around a US $75 billion market cap, Shopify is now one of Canada's most valuable companies and a model for what is possible. But why aren't there more Shopifys in Canada and Australia? Why is this such a rare bird, rara avis? Well, in Canada, I'm pleased to say change is in sight. Canadians are really fed up with the failed left-of-center policies of the government of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who has become deeply, deeply unpopular. At the next general election, which will take place on or before October 20th next year, Canada's Conservatives are likely to roar back to power under the leadership of Pierre Poilievre, shown on the right, with a vigorous, fresh, and largely free market agenda. Pierre Poilievre, the Tory leader, has said, "I'm not here to run your life. I'm not even here to run the country. I'm here to run a government that does a few things well and rather than a lot of things poorly." I think we could all agree with that sentiment. Anyway, we hope it's coming. Unfortunately, on the other side of the Atlantic, the hapless British Tories are likely to be creamed later this year by Labour, which is only likely to make Britain's malaise and many existing problems worse. But sometimes things need to get really, really bad before a country is ready to try something that might actually work. Argentina's new president, Javier Milei, is a good example of this. And so Latin America, perhaps with the exception of Chile and a couple other cases, having tried pretty much every unworkable system known to man, seems more ripe than many other parts of the world for free market ideas. Many of you will recognize the figure on the right in this picture, the Brazilian mixed martial arts star Renato Maicano, who said, "If you care for your country, read Ludwig von Mises." On this Economist cover of last year, the magazine asked, "Are free markets history?" No, friends, they are not history, though they are part of history and very much part of our future, and will be unleashed again in the English-speaking heartland of private enterprise. In my perfect world, the chefs are French, the tailors are English, the cars are German, the hospitals are American, as in the Mayo Clinic, the vodkas are, of course, Polish, and the economists are Austrian. Thank you very much, and I look forward to a robust discussion.
Thank you very much. Great presentation. I would like to ask our next speaker, Dr. Jose Piñera, to make his presentation.
Many thanks. I appreciate very much this invitation to participate in the Free Market Roadshow. I come from, of course, a very distant country, Chile, a very long and narrow country at the end of the world. The Spanish conquerors call it Finisterra, very appropriately, you see, at the end of the world. But I am very happy to be here. I have a shared admiration for America, its founding fathers, its Declaration of Independence, its Constitution, its free market system, weakened or not weakened. But I also feel myself a European in admiration for its history, its traditions, its manners, its values, its culture. So happy to be in Europe, but very worried to be in Europe, because my dear friend Richard Rand, who did an excellent presentation, as always, of course, show you a graph with the official debt of different countries. That is the debt that is clearly shown in the official numbers and referred to by the Maastricht Treaty, that countries should not have more than 70% of GNP of debt, even though many of them have much more. But that graph didn't show something that is extremely important, and it's the fact that all the countries that have followed Prince Otto von Bismarck pension system, the pay-as-you-go pension system that he created in 19th century Prussia, and that spread all over the world, of course, to America, to Latin America, have another debt, a hidden debt, but a very important one, and that is the entitlements that the people believe they have, because they have been told that their pension system is one in which they contribute to the system, and they can expect for sure, it's even called technically a defined benefit system, a given level of pension benefit at a given age. So, since the government have promised that for a century all over Europe, it is quite understandable that people believe that that is an entitlement, an acquired right, something that is a sacred deal between the government and the people. Some economists even talk about an intergenerational contract. But the fact of the matter is that when Bismarck created this, it was, of course, a very small tax on the use of labor to pay benefit to people at 65 years old, when the average life of expectancy in Prussia was 45. So he was a perfect politician, you see, creating a supposedly very important system, an illusion, but nobody received almost the pension because they died at 45, and the pension was at 65. So no problem, but there is the law of unintended consequence of the great Hayek, of course. Demography killed the Bismarckian system, because that depended on a lot of workers paying this little tax to finance very few retirees. Well, fertility rate went down. We all know the reasons. Doctors discover ways to extend our life. And nowadays, 3 workers in Europe, 2 workers, and some people predict 1 worker will be for every retiree. So the Bismarckian system is completely unsustainable for the future. And the truth of the matter is that it is an unfunded system. There are no funds hidden somewhere. In a pay-as-you-go system, where you contribute, you immediately pay. So there are no reserves, and yet the entitlements are enormous. You can see them here. These are numbers from Europe. I have my own numbers, but I don't use them because I want to be credible on this. These are European official numbers, hidden, of course, in Brussels somewhere, in some vaults in Brussels. But you see, it's not 100% of GNP, the debt, as Richard was mentioning, correctly, the official debt, but in the case of France, it's 400% of GNP. And you see Spain, 500% of GNP. If you add the official and the pension debt. Now, some people may say, well, but the pension debt can be eliminated by changing the level of the benefit, the level of retirement age. You saw President Emmanuel Macron, who tried just to increase 2 years the retirement age from 63 to 64. That is nothing nowadays. And he had his country paralyzed for a year and so on. And even though you had there a leader who dared at least to make that very, very small adjustment. Imagine the day where a French leader would have to tell their people that they will have to work until 70 and maybe not receive a pension benefit like they have, and the people who retire at 50 years old, the train people and the subways or whatever. You see, they have an enormous problems in front of them. And why? Because the essence of the Bismarckian system is to cut the link, the essential link, between the contributions that people put into the system and the benefits. Some laws define the benefits, the laws on pension levels, on working, or divided by sectors, because of course there's an enormous amount of pressure, lobby, strikes to get more benefits out of an unfunded system. But other laws define the contribution. There is no direct link. It's a vague link in some countries between what you have put into the system and what you get out of the system. And the name of the game, as we economists know, is that when incentives are so wrongly structured, everyone fights to minimize the contributions, under declaring income, being in the informal sector. There are many ways, and they try to maximize what they get out of the system. So we in Chile, 1980, 44 years ago, had the same problem, because the Bismarckian system arrived even to this Finisterre of the world. So we had a Bismarckian system. The system had at that time something like 100% pension entitlement debt. And I had studied in the US. I'm a son of Adam Smith, of Hayek, of Mises, of Friedman. They didn't address this problem specifically. But the narrative of freedom, of free markets, of incentive is, of course, crucial. So I began explaining on television that the situation was unsustainable. I was only 29 years old with a Harvard PhD in my hand, but that was not the important thing. The important thing is that I had a solution. And I dared to go on debates to explain the solution in simple terms, not in technocratic jargon of Harvard PhDs, but in ways in which the people could understand me. Well, the rest is history. I was appointed immediately Minister of Labor and Pension, and instead of postponing the agony of the system, so that's something that any minister can do, you see. You can play at the edges and leave the problem for the next minister, of course. That's the name of the game. You can enjoy your car, your chauffeur car, and postpone the problem, so it doesn't come to your face. We decided to take the bull by the horns. My French book is called precisely Le Taureau par les cornes, the bull by the horns. And since the mortal sin, if I may say, of the Bismarckian system is destroy the link between effort and reward, the solution was extremely simple: to completely restore the link between contributions and benefits. So the payroll tax, instead of going to an unfunded system or to a black hole in the universe, we decided that every worker could put the payroll tax into a personal retirement account that he cannot touch. He began working at 20, he retired at 65, 66, whatever. He accumulates money over 40, 45 years. And then when he retires, his pension is exactly, he has a huge amount of funds. The funds are invested by the private sector with total competition, open entry, diversified portfolio. Well, that is all technical, and of course, we designed the system to be sustainable and honest, something extremely important in this. And in 44 years, nobody has stole 1 peso from the system, because we found 10 ways to guarantee, not to guarantee, to safely have them. So when you retire, you don't look to the government, to the Minister of Finance, to the European Union. You look at the balance on your account. And then you transform that balance into an annuity if you want, or you make a program withdrawal. We have several ways to withdraw the money in an intelligent way to allow for people's preference. But the key fact is that your pension benefit is totally dependent on how much you have saved. Now, of course, we have a safety net for the very poor, people who have been unemployed. Out of solidarity and compassion, we finance with general tax revenues a minimum level, as every country does. But most workers depend on saving during all their life in their account. How do I move this here? The green button. There are 2 green buttons.
The big one.
The big one. You should say the big green button. Now, the second good thing of linking contributions and benefits in a personal retirement accounts is that if those money is invested in the capital markets, I am a great believer in the importance in the capital markets in free societies. We didn't have a capital market at all in Chile, of course, in 1980. But we allowed the money to be invested safely in the capital markets. We remember we played around with a fund could get a 4% rate of return above inflation on average. Not an imposition, was an assumption. Well, but we took a lot of decisions to try to maximize that rate, as, for example, doing a virtuous sequence of first creating the pension funds and later on privatizing the big state-owned companies so that the pension funds will buy shares of those companies that lost money, were very undervalued. Therefore, when the private sector began to manage the telecommunication, the energy companies, most of the returns accrued to the workers of Chile through their pension funds. So the incredible thing is that the power of compound interest that is behind all this. You see, that is the beauty of the system. We have allowed the worker to benefit the power of compound interest. That compound interest has been in history since the Phoenicians, of course, and the Venetians, other people knew that, and the professionals knew that, and the money manager, but the worker had never been benefited from the power of compound interest, because in the only thing that maybe Karl Marx was right was when he wrote in the 19th century that the worker only has his wage, and at the end of the month, after paying rent, clothes, food, he doesn't have money to save. So in order to benefit from compound interest, you need savings. So some people could benefit legitimately from compound interest during the full of history, but not the workers. And yet, it is said that Einstein said that the most powerful force in the world is compound interest. So we gave every worker in my country the possibility to benefit from the most powerful force in the world. And instead of asking them to save on their food or clothes consumption, they couldn't. We said, you can save with your payroll tax. Instead of going to the government, now goes to your personal retirement account. And that basically is invested similarly between different levels of incomes. We tweak the system in order to make it more similar so that there will be no big difference in return. The real return rate for 44 years has been 7% above inflation on average for 44 years. If you get 7%, if something increases 7%, in 10 years it doubles. That's arithmetic. And in 20 years, it multiplied by 4. Since the system has 40 years, the funds of the workers have multiplied enormously by the power of compound interest. And this graph, one of many, shows you that today, if a worker has 100, 24% are his or her payroll tax, his contribution, his monthly contribution. In America, the FICA tax. 76% is returns from the well-managed portfolio investment, from, I call it capitalization. I prefer répartition, is Bismarck, we are capitalization. So 76% comes from returns. So we have multiplied the contributions of the worker by 4. And these workers understand. Well, I go on television a lot. I enjoy debate. And I go on television, I debate any socialist senator any day, at any time, dressed in whatever way he wants. And of course, I debate them continuously. And recently, you may have heard that people made a mistake, elected a very far-left government. That far-left government wanted to dismantle our constitution. John Sullivan just mentioned it to me, he knows everything. And everyone thought that, okay, a constitution that has been there for 40 years, created an exceptional historic moment, will be thrown away. Well, they tried. They began writing a constitution from zero. I said, what a nonsense. We have a constitution, has been 40 years. We have elected 8 democratic governments. It has allowed the country to grow at 7% a year. Chile has become the richest country in Latin America by far in income per capita more than Argentina. Well, Argentina with the Peronists. Well, they tried to write a constitution, but they made a huge mistake. They didn't want, of course, to ensure in the constitution the property of the pension funds that I had ensured 44 years ago. No, they wanted to take that away because politicians are greedy. You see, if they see this huge amount of money in the pension fund, they want to take it. You see, that famous American say, why do you steal banks? Well, but that is where the money is, you see. So the money in Chile, 80% of GDP equivalent is in the pension fund, the private pension fund. So if you want to use that money to be re-elected permanently, as so many politicians want, of course, you need to touch the pension fund money. So the far left government made this mistake of not willing to introduce in the Constitution the protection of property rights. And that gave me an incredible advantage. I went on television and said to the people of the Chile, who had voted initially to begin writing a new constitution, I said, if you have a new constitution, your pension fund will be at risk. And thanks God we had Argentina, who under President Kirchner confiscated the pension funds 15 years ago and has been a huge disaster. So I love Kirchner because he helped us explain very well to the workers what happens when a president confiscates the total pension fund. But it was only $30 billion, you see. We have $220 billion. So we have 6 times what Argentina, a country 3 times bigger than Chile, has. So, and of sorry, we won the referendum. The Constitution was defeated with a lot of other provision, and there is no woman nor man, you see, only vague people. That was only the Constitution. Well, you know that in Europe. And a lot of things that they loved, the left, all that defeated because they didn't want to include property of the pension funds. And workers are not fools. They may not know about monetary policy, cyber money, M1, M2, M3, but they know about their funds. They receive every 4 months a statement, I put that in the law, from the pension manager, with this kind of graphs showing them the money, show me the money. So I went on television, here's your money, if you approve this constitution, with gender equality, multinational languages, all the left nonsense. Okay, I don't fight. That is, I fight, but it's your money. We even created a movement. With my money, no. Con mi plata, no. With my money, no. Simple. We don't use first pillar, second pillar. Here in Europe, you like the pillars. That is Greek temples have pillars. My system has money in the funds. I speak the language of the people, the language that people understand, backed by good economics, free market economics from the US, of course. So we defeated the constitution. So the system in Chile now is more stronger than ever. It has been won in a referendum 44 years after it began. And we have the constitution, we have the same constitution as 44 years ago, that incidentally I signed, but come on, you can sign the constitution, this is much more important. Now, someone will say, and here I end, I have 5 minutes? Okay, yes, because of the green button thing. Here, you see, when I say this, here some people immediately say, yeah, okay, but this a system like this can only be done in a long and narrow country, or in a country that produces good red wine, or in a country. So the first 10 years when I went around the world and explained the system, it was always that way. Okay, great, but this can only be done in Chile, or because historical circles, or because political, so everyone, or because we're Catholics. You see, there was a theory that Catholics, well, whatever. Well, now I don't have to explain it. I just showed this. I have dedicated my life to share this experience around the world because I am deeply worried. You see, the numbers we saw before for Europe have enormous consequences, not only social consequences. We saw the Greek people crying, those old retirees sitting in the front of the banks crying because their pension had been cut 30%. If you cut the pension of an old people 30%, that people dies. not to mention a woman. Women are much healthier and responsible than men, of course, we know all that. So they live longer lives. God wants more women living longer lives. So the widows of Europe could suffer enormously if pension benefits have to go down because of those numbers. Politically, you can imagine the strikes. When Macron 62, 64, imagine 70, 75 eventually. Even national security, imagine that the bad guys in the world were to see Europe with the strikes, with convulsion, that will come. You see, imagine what happened in Greece some years ago, happening in France, in Germany, Spain, in Italy, big countries. So even from a national security point of view, of course, see, the countries are, Social Security, pension spending is the largest single item of government spending in every country of the world. Richard showed it. The single largest government program. And that program is going bankrupt, inevitably, because of those demographic trends I explained. So this is huge, and it's not in my... And eventually, that mind, of course, is crowding out other things like national security. I follow American politics, not too much, but I have found when a certain candidate asks Europeans spend 2% because you have and the Europeans don't want, because of course they have 6 weeks vacation. You see, if you have 6 week vacation by La Sorbonne professor, you cannot buy good tanks. But I am always astonished because 2%, if I had a very bad neighbor, I would spend maybe 10% on the, or maybe 20%. 2% is a tip, you see. Well, anyway, I am not getting into issues that are not my issues, but they are in a way that if you spend so much money on entitlements, on pensions, on, well, then you cannot have money for other things, for infrastructure, for national defense, for whatever. So this can be done, it has been done. I have dedicated my life, I am very, this is not my numbers, these are 46 countries, not counties, countries. And in the 46 are developed countries. Australia, I spent 10 years going to Australia. Here it was mentioned very much. In 1992, 12 years after Chile, Australia did the superannuation system. That is basically all the way the Chilean system. And Australians are very good at regulating it. It is working extremely well. And other countries have it partially. This is partial or total. I remember Sweden. Paul Kernberg went to Chile with 10 senators, I explained, and they introduced 2.5% of wage system. So Sweden has a small capitalization system and a big yet pay-as-you-go system. But I believe that with time, you don't have to do anything one day to another. That is God's privilege, not mine. So some are partial privatization. But you have developed countries like that. In Latin America, the biggest one, I'm very proud, is Mexico. Mexico has 50 million little Mexicans going around with a personal retirement account. Every time I go with my dear wife to Cancun to rest after all my travels, I ask the taxi, this 1 hour to Cancun from the airport, you have a personal retirement account, and how much money do you have? And he ended up showing me the account. And he's building the taxi driver. So I give him an extra tip so that his account can go up a little more. So this can be done. What it needs is vision and courage to extremely discuss. It's not technical. The technicality of this, let me declare my importance. It's technically it's not so complicated. It's not rocket science. It's common sense. Saving for old age is common sense. My mother understood that very well. So this can be done. But of course, you cannot have a politician who is waiting just for the next election or the next headline and trying. I met a lot of politicians in Europe who told me, great idea, let me do it in my next term, in my second term. One Spanish guy. I did a full study for Spain. I showed it to him. He was ready to go 20 years ago. He said, in 6 months, I will win an election. I am over. Then came a terrorist attack on a train station, and the guy lost in history and without this legacy. So carpe diem, of course, carpe diem. If you God gave you the possibility of being close to political power. Use that political power not to stay there and to be famous and to travel in the presidential jet, but to do what is good, what is correct, what is noble. That should be asked of each of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Piñera, for your presentation. And now I have one question for each of you, and then probably open the floor, or maybe I have some other questions depending on our discussion. I'll start with Jose. My question goes to the Chilean pension fund. How does it compare to the world's largest pension fund, the Norwegian pension fund? Because
God gave Norwegian oil, of course. It's an oil pension fund. It's a fund based on something that God gave, and they opened the economy for private sector, I imagine, to discover the oil. I was also Minister of Mining in Chile afterwards, and I had to correct a certain President Allende who had nationalized all mining, and therefore were zero exploration and exploitation, and I opened the mining sector of Chile, and today Chile is the largest copper-producing country in the world. So I admire the Norwegians in opening the system, but honestly, it's with oil, so it's different. But they are saving, they're using capital market, they have this huge, but it's less important or less interesting. It's a very special case, the case of Norwegian with respect to Chile. The Chilean system is clearly have explained.
Well, my next question goes to Stefan. You mentioned at the end of your presentation, you said like the main challenges of the Ozanada region are the politicians, the challenges to the free market. So how could you conclude the main challenges of the free market? Are these really the politicians, or what are the main challenges which you can find for Canada and for Australia?
Well, I don't know that there's a one-size-fits-all answer covering all parts of the world, but thinking specifically about countries like Canada and Australia, which had the very distinctive characteristics that I mentioned in terms of large size, huge natural resources, small populations, and so on. So, you can argue that Canada in particular undershoots its potential. So if you look at French nuclear reactors run on uranium from Canada, Canadian yellow cake. You have some of the most productive grain production in the world in Western Canada. Our energy is very green. It's mostly hydroelectric. It's a country of immense potential, and insofar it's been undershooting its potential, it's because of bad policies, and policies where the full force of free market potential has been blunted by bad policies or over-cautious policies. So I think, certainly in the Canadian case, to unleash the power of Canada is going to require not only a new conservative government, but a conservative government that is probably less cautious than the ones we've had in previous generations. Although they were good, they remained very Canadian and cautious. I have to say that I'm a great admirer of Chile and what Mr. Piñera and his colleagues have done in Chile. It's worth noting that although Canada is a laggard in some fields, because Canada was actually rather slow to develop a state pension system. So it had a kind of old age security system that was paying out relatively small amounts, mostly to poor people. It didn't actually set up the Canada pension plan until the 1960s. So the CPP is now one of the world's largest fully funded pension systems. So Canada basically learned the mistakes of the Bismarckian pay-as-you-go systems and the problems with those. So when it created the CPP rather late in the game, it learned from those. And the CPP is one of the world's biggest institutional investors, and I think quite successful. The one thing I would criticize about it is is that it doesn't have the linkage between the money you pay in and the money that's in the system that's yours. So there isn't the aspect of the personal retirement accounts, which I think would be a real advantage. But anyway, in this respect, Canada did get it mostly right.
So what do you call like less cautious politics? Could you explain that?
Well, I mean, I think in a number of countries today, I think especially in the UK, you have this feeling that there's a strong feeling of malaise, the country's broken. Canada, as a kind of daughter of Britain, with some French characteristics, has many of the same problems. It has a public health system that's overstretched with long waiting lists. Housing is unaffordable and difficult to build. There's a general sense that, and also the level of immigration, although Canada has run very intelligent immigration policies on points-based systems and has been seen as a kind of leader in intelligent immigration, it has brought in a lot of people that can't find housing at a reasonable cost and also don't have their professional qualifications recognized very quickly. So there's a feeling in the country that some major change is needed. And I think a popular feeling for the need for major change, major reform, can be a very great spur to action.
Thank you. And my question to Richard Rahn, you showed us a huge depth spiral of different countries, especially United States or Japan, where this governmental debt spiral is leading and what can be the cure?
Well, there's only one, excuse me. There's only one real cure, and that's to reduce the growth rates of government spending. Some advocate tax increases, but most of the world's major countries are taxed out. You're all familiar with the Laffer curve, and it shows beyond some point, increases in tax rates don't provide additional revenue. And most countries are at or actually above that. We see it in the United States with the state income taxes. New York and California have very high state income taxes. There's a number of states like Florida and Texas that have no state income tax. And so you have a huge flood of capital and people to places like Florida and Texas. But people want some easy panacea for it. And you got to reduce the spending. And as Jose, more than any man in the entire world, has pointed out, if we don't do something about the pension system, all is lost. And that's why, what do you have, 46 countries have now adopted your system? And so the solution to the world's problem is Jose Pinero. I have such admiration for this man because he not only came up with it, but I've been with him in a number of countries, and he's the world's greatest salesman for good economic policy. And we see what's happening here in Europe. Governments don't have the amount of money they need, maybe for defense, given all the new wars. And it's all going into various social programs, primarily pensions and health. And I mean, you can do the basic arithmetic that is not sustainable, and it would get to the point where the interest in inflation. A lot of countries don't like to increase tax rates, but if you don't increase the tax rate, and of course I just pointed out, that doesn't give you any more revenue, so you either cut spending or you go to more inflation, and it reduces real incomes. And I don't know, you guys have any easy way out?
Do you want to react on the question or no? Not an easy question. Before I open the floor, I have one last question to all of you. Yeah. And you can prepare your questions during the time. So the title of the panel is Curing...
There's only a little bit of time left.
We have 10 minutes altogether.
Yeah, I'm saying if you're going to open to the floor.
just one last question. And the title of the panel is Curing Economic Malpractice. So how can you define economic malpractice? How can we distinguish between legitimate economic policies and practices and the practices which can be harmful for the economies?
I'll start off with it. It's easy. Certain things worked. Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher put a set of policies in differently. They worked. They weren't perfect, but they worked. And we look around the world at places, I mean, look at Biden's economic advisor. How hard is this to figure out? Chile works. You look at the rest of Latin America, Chile was a poor country. And now it's got the highest per capita income in South America, correct? And it was due to basically one man who could articulate it and sell it to his country. We don't have to invent anything new. Those of us who have come to Eastern Europe and so forth, or Central Europe, I mean, you're doing a lot of the right things here in Hungary. With Barbara Combs' whole effort with her roadshow is taking the policies that worked in a number of countries and communicating it to places where people may are not totally aware. I mean, it's not we have to reinvent a wheel.
And again, with regard to Canada, Australia, very nice countries, very often voted as the countries people would most want to emigrate to, safe and friendly people and so on. But again, these are countries that are probably undershooting their economic potential and, again, too comfortable with restrictions on free markets, cartelized systems, and we're reaching a stage, particularly in Canada, where people have had enough. They would like to see the unleashing of economic growth and prosperity again, and I think it's going to happen.
You have one other thing you have to do in Canada. You got to warm the place up.
With the exception of where I live on the very far west coast, but perhaps that's already happening, and that's kind of the dirty little secret of what many people call climate change, is that Canada does seem to be warming, so it's kind of an advantage.
Well, I cannot but agree fully with Richard Ryan. Let's go to the floor.
Thank you very much. We have 7 minutes left, so it's time for 2 or 3 questions. Please introduce yourself and...
Fair to the lady. Sorry. You keep it.
Hello, I'm Judy DeBarney, and I was delighted to hear all of you speak this afternoon. Congratulations. Particularly Dr. Piñera. I just got back from Panama 2 nights ago. We had presidential elections, and one of the big issues is the social security system in Panama runs out to 0 next year. Maybe the end of this year. They're not sure. They're not sure of the accounts. What would you suggest when you got to that point? What can they do?
Well, very good question. In a way, thank you for that, because I didn't mention, I forgot, mea minima culpa, that a very important part of creating a new system is the transition system. That is, even though the idea may be good, of course you have to go from a pay-as-you-go in France, in Germany, to a system of personal account. The transition is a very difficult thing to do. It's extremely complex, economically, financially, politically, but it can be done. We did it 45 years ago without capital markets in Chile. In a world today where you have this huge capital market, because the capital markets are very important, you can push a little the cost of the transition using capital markets, many ways. I don't want to go into technicalities. But the transition is extremely important and it must be dealt with. So in countries that are sometimes I have moved forward. Of course, immediately comes the issue of the transition, and for example, in the case of Spain, I even design a transition. I don't do that. I try to be 2, 3, 4 days in a country. There are 200 countries. But in the case of Spain, the mother country, they asked me to stay a month or 2 months, and I did a full study of the transition, and I presented it to Prime Minister Aznar and Raton, all the elite. And they didn't there because of political courage. They agree with the technical solution. Now, if you're saying Panama, I don't know very well. Panama is a very special country in many ways. Maybe I have not been in 20 years or whatever. But the only good thing is that when you don't have any social security system, is that you can begin from zero. You see, there's no transition problem. You simply have to tell the people if you want to have a pension in life, you have to save a little. Now, how much of the wage depends on many. You can begin with the 2% here, 5%. In Chile, it's 10%. So that depends. But it's easier to begin from zero, creating. I remember I was in South Africa once, 10 times of Mandela. South Africa didn't have because of the apartheid, blah, 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 blah. So it's easier to begin a system from zero. You see, obviously. Now, I'm not talking about the crisis of what happened to the old people. That is another thing. They will have to be kept by the government. That is another problem. It's not, but it's easier to begin building a building from zero than to have a big building but decadent and wrong and to change the whole structure. And that's what we did in Chile, and that's what had to be done in Europe. So it is true that there is a huge technical problem. I have even explained it in Brussels. But we can solve that. I am not a pessimist in life. I believe we can solve those problems. That is, with rationality, with vision, with honesty among all, nobody benefiting from the solution, either financially or politically. You need leaders. Without leaders like Thatcher, and John worked with Thatcher. I was invited by Thatcher government as a minister, the first and only Chilean minister to be invited officially by Her Majesty the Queen at 30 years old to visit the United Kingdom and to be received. You see, they have all this protocol, you know, they have a monarchy very well established. So Thatcher to me is a huge hero. In a way, even more than Reagan. Reagan is in the Cold War thing. On Social Security, he didn't even dare to touch the essence of the problem. That's why I have been using a lot of my time in the US. We were very close with Clinton. I was invited to the White House Summit on Security. We had the solution. Clinton agreed with the solution. And then he got distracted. And I didn't take care of that angle. You see, that angle I cannot work it. So I told all this story. Please read it, President Clinton, the Chilean border, because it's quite beautiful. And I finish, I like poetry. I finish quoting the words Shakespeare gave to Hamlet. You see, find me the man who is not a slave of passions, and I will keep him in my heart. In my heart of hearts. Well, Bill Clinton was a brilliant politician in many ways, but we all know he was a slave of little passions. And because, okay, it was not Ava Gardner, you see. But anyway, Clinton didn't do it. But we were close, and then we were very close with George W. Bush. I visited him in Austin at the Governor Mansion. He invited me with Laura. We got dinner, 4-hour explanation. He ran on the issue. As president, he proposed in the State of the Union this system. I have a State of the Union address where a third of the State of the Union address is a proposal of this system. I have it in you can imagine. But then another man, very different from Monica, Osama, came in, destroyed towers. The U.S. went into 2 wars. You cannot solve the transition problem and use the fiscal resources. Clinton even left a little surplus with 2 wars. So I have twice failed myself of not getting an angle, not caring about the Monicas and the Osamas of the world. I have solved the technical. I am waiting for the third one. I am young enough, I hope, to be able to help the country where I study and where my eldest children have been born, and that I admire enormously, even though I will always remain and be as a Chilean. I will never change the nationality of my country. But I am an honorary American, and so I have to do that. I am failing until the US doesn't have a system of private retirement accounts. Okay, so Panama. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, our time has run up, and we have to finish here. Thank you. Please give a big applause to our panelists here. And we will have a 25 minutes break, and please come back 10 minutes to 4 for the last panel. Thank you.